Welcome to Storytelling Live. Wow. Wow. my really good friend. I shouldn't say this, but I have to. I mean, it just happened. I had to drop him off at the ER just now. It's very, very, very worrisome because he drinks to the point where he can no longer, like, his eyes don't even focus anymore. He's like and he has like he looks like a different person. So it's exactly what we're talking about with like an alternate personality. It's very Jekyll and Hyde. He's actually, hey Michael, hi Adam. It's rough. It's rough. It was rough, and I noticed that he was passed out. Well, he was passed out all afternoon. And hi Alexandra. And I noticed that he was in the back of my car. He was passed out all afternoon. He has a capacity. Hello, Susan. How are you doing, my dear? Oh, so good to see you. Remember how it used to be a little bit light out the back window and we could watch it fade, as story time went on? But now it's just dark, and that's us. And we're in autumn, and we're talking about bipolarism, and we're talking about people who can sometimes switch, and it's real. It does happen, and it's a problem. It's a bad thing, so my prayers go out to him, and I'm very worried right now. So because I just dropped him off at the thank you. I just dropped him off at the ER. And, well, it's, what can I say? I've been thinking a lot about duality. I'm definitely not, the authority on duality. I'm just reading this story and experiencing it with you. But there is like a left path and a right path, right? And we're just trying to choose the middle path and like be balanced. So balance is what we're about. So I mean, the whole deal, I guess, about extreme concepts of duality is that we try to balance the middle path. And my heart really is with him tonight, and it's tough to hold back tears, but that's not what this is about. This is about escapism. Hello, Evan. I mean, Mike. Hello, Eva and Mike. Dude, David. Dude, I'm glad to see you here, man. What's up with you? Do I even... Man, I haven't seen you since I was like 16, maybe 19 or something like that, I remember. I'm so glad to see you here, bro. So yeah, my friend has been inebriated. Fucking name's right. So my friend has been inebriated since Wednesday. So he goes to the park and gets wasted, and then somebody sees him in the park, and then they call the they call the 911. 911 comes out. Whoever, I guess ER people, or I don't know who they send first. Cops probably first, and then they check his pulse. He's barely got a pulse, right? He's in a public park, and they take him into the hospital. So apparently he's been in the hospital a couple times this week. And he's been on a bender since Wednesday, and basically just wants to be unconscious, doesn't want to respond to anything. And so my friend, yeah, it's bad. He's lost all hope, and nothing makes any sense anymore. And it's deep, and it's internal. And I can't even tell you all about it, because he's going to watch this in a couple days, I could tell you in PM, in private message, But he's just got my heart, and I'm very, very worried. And I love this guy, man. from way back. We've been friends for 7, maybe 9 years now, something like that. And he's scared me before recently, so he's reaching his wit's end, for real, the wit's end, that very end. Yeah. Well, I brought him a guitar, David. I brought him a guitar. I mean, I thought we were just going to chill out and see, and he was going to be like, loopy, but we would get him up out of bed and give him the guitar, and we would, play. And he's been wanting this guitar of mine. I rescued it from a cafe. I rescued it from a cafe years ago, man, and I went over it and glued parts and then fixed the tuning pegs and the tuning machines, and I fixed it all up and I made it nice. And it sounds good. And he heard it. Thank you, Susan. It's really hard to take right now. It's really hard to take. As I said, I just dropped him off a couple hours ago. I mean, I've been doing nothing, but I wolfed down a dinner. I felt weird about eating, and then I watched the news. And then it was time to come down here and get ready for this. And, yeah, I know. He doesn't want to wake up, but maybe the guitar can bring him around, David. Yeah. I'm just hoping. I told him about the guitar. He cannot actually hear now. He can't actually hear. I told him, I love you. And his eyes opened up. I was like, oh, jeez, dude. Anyway, so now I'm telling hundreds of people about this, and y'all don't need to know, right? Because it's my business. But I'm saying it out loud because maybe you know someone like this too. And if you do, you know how it pulls on your heart. And you cannot, but here's what I was headed to before, he was unconscious again. He's just trying to sleep it. He sleeps very hard. And he was trying to sleep in my back. We got him in the back of my car. And I got him in the emergency. The ER people told me to come around. Oh, yeah, it's out there. It's rampant, bro. It's out there. And they told me to pull around close. I said, can you bring a wheelchair or something? They said, oh, we got a gurney. We'll bring a gurney. All right, cool. So I said, hey, I was like, and then I didn't notice, but there were like people watching over my shoulder. All of a sudden, there's like people. Guy had ambulance driver. He came around. He was like left shoulder. He was like tied on my left shoulder. And then there was some other people, and they're like zoop. There was like 7 people all of a sudden. I was just trying to get my buddy out of the back, and I said, hey, come on, babe. Come on, get up, take my hand. Let me take your arm. He's like, no, man, no, I want to stay here. The people around me saw that, and they're all of a sudden like triggered. I said, and they said, are you going to need some help with that? I'm like, no, I don't need your macho crap right now. That's the last thing I need. And I was like, I told them, what I'm trying to do is de-escalate the moment. And I just told them, come on, man. I'm with you, and I love you, man. And we're just going to get up. And these people are going to make you, they're going to help you feel better. He's already been there 3 times. A couple times on exit, he went out to drink some more. So, I shouldn't be telling you all this, but I'm just telling you because I know that this is a common story. This has nothing to do with tonight, except for the fact that it is duality, diagnosed bipolarism. However, our character tonight, he's a rich guy. And really, he's kind of horny, right? That's what he is. So he's got like these visceral needs, and he, as a proper English gentleman, he doesn't feel right, satisfying whatever kind of desires as a gentleman. So he's going to turn into something else, and I think that's ridiculous. But the story is really entertaining, and if you haven't been with us for the past 3 weeks, I'm Yusuf Alawi. This is Storytelling Live. We're reading these old stories to try to evade the terror and the stress of what's going on in the world outside right now. This is a tiny, as some of our people have said, this is a tiny campfire that we share. I call it a blanket fort. Welcome to the blanket fort, yeah? We're here to keep each other company in good Mike, that is very you do one person's worth and let the experts do the rest. There is a time when one must resign. Yeah, you found out. Yeah, he disappeared. Scott, sequestered. Okay, okay. They starved him, and they wouldn't let him. He escaped. Lost 60 pounds. Wow, that's a grim, 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 grim story. This guy, they let him go as soon as he sort of recovers. So when he's in the state, no eye focus, no, it's just like we don't even know him. We don't even know him. He's a total Mr. Hyde. Yeah. But then when he gets back to himself, he's like beautiful, artistic poet guy, you know, and you would love him if you met him. As a matter of fact, he kind of commands that out of everyone who meets him. He's a very charming person, very, very charming and wonderful person. And I miss him. And I told him I would miss him. And I told him I'd be there on the flip side with that guitar for him. It's just, it's not a fancy electric or anything, you know. It's just an acoustic that was sitting collecting dust in an old cafe. And I said, you need that? And they said, no, we were trying to, you want it? Like, yeah. I need. And I took it and I repaired it and I put some new strings on it. It sounds really sweet now. So that's one aspect of duality. The other aspect of duality that I want to talk about is the middle road. I already talked about it. Big hug. Thank you, Rosana. Muchas gracias. Es un gran placer que estás con nosotros ahorita. So what I'm trying to say is that tonight, like, I'm not even going to get on the politics of the COVID or whatever. Thank you. The high art of horror. Well, it's not even horror, man. You know, these are like crazy Victorian allegories or whatever. It's not even scary or anything, you know. It's just what we have. But they're fun characters because they're archetypes and we like to play with them. And I will switch channels now because we need to, I can't stay in this mode forever. His girlfriend is still with him. I left her in tears and she's worried for him. She's worried for herself and I'm worried for her. I'm worried for them. She's probably gonna, I don't know. I can't say any more right now because it's personal business. A friend of mine is like a commercial graphic artist and he doesn't do it professionally right now. He used to. But guess what happened? He's been making crazy monsters for Halloween. And I said, what about Mr. Hyde? Because that might be good. He's like, yeah, Mr. Hyde. So guess what? I've got an artistic rendering of Mr. Hyde. We're going to bring that right up right now. So he's making these printouts. What a hunk. So it's a jointed figure. And then you're supposed to print it. And he makes these PDFs. And his arms are all crinkled. And I'm like, hey, man, that's going to be a bitch to cut. He's like, oh, geez. No, he didn't say, oh, geez. I'm sorry. I said, oh, geez. And he just said, patience. Look at these cool, you know, he's got pipe leg jeans and big old Beatles boots and stuff. So guess what? I made us a special one. And I wonder if you're going to be able to tell. There you go. Check him out. He's like dancing a jig. Right? It's so cool. Right? So you got to put these, you got to cut it out and put these little brads in it. They fold flat behind. Yeah. That's exactly what he's doing. Is he's David. Actually, David, you probably know this guy. His name is John. I'll tell you the name. Yeah, his name's John Fair, and he does kilowatts normally. And I'm like, John, you gotta sell these, man, because it's cool, you know. It's cool. So we have that. I wish that he had given me like a method as to right. It totally rocks. It's so fun. It's like ah, ah, ah. Whoops, whoops, whoops. There we go. And so he's basically like so. Anyway, okay, David, I'll catch up with you. Thank you for stopping in, and check you later, bro. So David's an old ass friend from like when I was a teenager. We used to hang out at shows and parties and do stuff. You know, alcohol is totally a toxin, man. You need to know. She's so tall. Thanks, Chris T. Love you. All right, bro. I will talk to you soon. So, thank you. David, we have shared so much alcohol together. Yeah. Oh, you have a Kilowatts t-shirt? Mike? You have a Kilowatts t-shirt? He was selling t-shirts? If there's a t-shirt, both John and I need to see a copy of that because it might be a bootleg. People were bootlegging the hell out of his artwork for a while. He only sells it for like $5. He'll mail it to you, mail included, yeah, delivery, shipment, whatever. So my language is already flying out. I'm really off kilter. I'm trying to get grounded. Maybe after reading a little bit, I could get grounded. If you're interested in knowing more about tonight's story that we're finishing, I highly, 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 highly recommend the Norton edition. Wow, it's out of focus, out of focus. Anyway, I highly recommend the Norton edition. And even the Norton, let's see, the actual story is like, boom, boom, right? That's the story right there. It's like 96 pages. That's why we're going over it in Storytelling Live. And the rest of this is really cool stuff. Critical essays and word from the author. So we're actually going to hear from Mr. Stevenson himself and Robert. Okay, and another thing I wanted to talk about before I actually got into the story, and if I think of other things, maybe I'll stop the story and we will just stop the story and I'll just tell you anyway. But I'm just trying to remember everything. I didn't really write notes this week. This week went so quickly until tonight when 7:30 just wouldn't roll around. I've been twiddling my thumbs, you know, in the living room, just going, when is this going to start? You know, it just felt like it was happening forever. And as a matter of fact, it was probably only a space of about 40 minutes. Time dilates and contracts during COVID time. And if you're watching Storytelling Live because you think it's going to be like, you know, a documented event of one man's spiral into insanity, I'm afraid you're gonna be disappointed. But because I'm actually balanced in a really creative way, you know, but you will catch my different thoughts throughout over time. And tonight I am scattered. for real, because I'm very distracted, and my friend is going to spend the night in the hospital, and they're actually going to check him neurologically to see if there's actually something wrong with his brain. He was barely able to move around and barely responsive. And I've been around him when he's like that. I've never tried to wake him up. And now I know what happens when you try to wake him up. The point that I tried to make like 10, 15 minutes ago was that the ER dudes were sitting behind me, and then they were going to try to amplify it up. They were ready to be sort of strong, and that's a bunch of bullshit. I got him right up and into the gurney with love and caring. You have to be strong in a time like this when everybody's consciousness around in the surrounding area is animal. And they have descended into their id. And he's descended in his id. He's helpless. He's helpless in there. And the people around, the technicians and the doctors, and they are all of a sudden in their id stance, and they are going to be unmovable. But I said, what I did was I did some very sweet talking to my friend, and I got him up out of the car. And they, curiously enough, imitated my tone of voice. So we can change things with our perspective and with our confidence and power. And we can de-escalate moments like that. I don't know about the cops, but I can tell you about the EMTs. Newsflash, and I don't pretend to be the actual authority on Jekyll and Hyde or any of this. I did read this Norton edition here. I have read other things. Nothing to any extent. What I want to say is that when I first started reading this out loud to you guys, I said, I noted that the Frederick March 1930s version of this, the movie, they pronounced his name Jekyll, and my friend and I thought it was hilarious because they call him Jekyll. I just done enough research to figure out that his name, with the Scottish intonation, it's a long E. It's not a short E. It's a long E. Jekyll. That's the correct Scottish pronunciation, because Stevenson's Scottish. Edinburgh. If he was from Edinburgh, how did he end up in Carmel? He's the guy who did Treasure Island, yeah? So Treasure Island is Point Lobos in Carmel. But anyway, Point Lobos is a, how do you call it, peninsula. Anyway, so I wanted to tell you, Jekyll, but we're going to call him Jekyll for this, just because I've been calling him Jekyll the whole time. So, I'm American. I'm an American guy, right? Kind of, sort of. So tonight, again, in case you're just tuning in, we will hear Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. And then after that, we're going to hear a few words from Robert Louis Stevenson himself. And FYI, Gwar was live 47 minutes ago. So you might have missed the Gwar show, but it's kind of not the same since that wonderful singer passed away. Damn, these times. Let me see. I think I might like to have a quick pee break beforehand, and let me see. Zoop-de-doop-de-doo. Whoops. I'm gonna find some quick music. and we will find, come on, man. Okay. Nope. 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 Let me see here. Just let me see. Nope. All right, just a minute. I'm sorry. You know, you guys are so patient, but I have to run out. If you need a break, take it now, because we're probably going to read through this the whole time. It's going to be cool. Or I don't know. Anyway, maybe. Let me see here. I don't have it. I don't have it. I have fun stuff, though. Let me see here. Here, check this out. I'll be right back. This is a group that I was in when I was 16, 17, when I was new wave and everything was new, and we had the gated reverb. Can you tell? I'll be right back. I couldn't find it, Adam. I couldn't find it. I was just looking for it. I couldn't find it. I'm so sorry. I thought I had it right on hand, but I don't. If I need another break, I'll look for it again, and we will have that. But yeah, so we recorded that professionally back in 1980 something, and you got a recording? Okay, that would be cool. Anyway, so we did this in professional studio, and I didn't know anything about anything. I'd never been in a studio before, but it was fun. And then I moved here years later, right? Really. And I have it. And then I moved here years later, and I'm attending yoga class, and there are these people in it, and I don't really talk to them. And then it turns out that I meet someone who I've been practicing yoga with for like 3 years, and I didn't really talk to them. Turns out they're from Scottsdale, and I said, what? And I said, and he said, well, we used to have a music studio in Scottsdale, Arizona, and that was called XYZ Studio. I said, XYZ Studio? In Scottsdale? You're Alan? He said, I'm Alan. I told you I was Alan. I'm Alan. What? You're that guy. He had a rack effect that was like this. compressor, multi-bad compression type thing that was just magic. He would just push this one button and everything sounded sweet. I remember that guy. He was magic. He was great, man. He was great. And they used to live close to where I live. And now they moved to Hawaii. So God bless them. I'll go out and visit them at some point. Okay. We could go on like this forever, but we're not going to. Henry Jekyll's full statement of the case. I was born in the year 18-something to a large fortune, endowed besides with excellent parts, inclined by nature to industry, fond of the respect of the wise and good among my fellow men, and thus, as might have been supposed, with every guarantee of an honorable and distinguished future. And indeed, the worst of my faults was a certain impatient gaiety of disposition, such as has made the happiness of many, but such as I found it, hard to reconcile with my imperious desire to carry my head high and wear a more than commonly grave countenance before the public. Hence it came about that I concealed my pleasures, and that when I reached years of reflection, I began to look round me and take stock of my progress and position in the world, and I stood already committed to profound duplicity of life. Many a man would have even blazoned such irregularities as I was guilty of, but from the high views that I had set before me, I regarded and hid them with an almost morbid sense of shame. It was thus rather that shame is the big enemy here, you know what I'm saying? Big enemy. Shame. This is bullspit. It was thus rather the exacting nature of my aspirations than any particular degradation in my faults that made me what I was, and with even a deeper trench than in the majority of men, severed in me those provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature. In this case, I was driven to reflect deeply and inveterately on that hard law of life, which lies at the root of religion and is one of the most plentiful springs of distress. Though so profound a double dealer, I was in no sense a hypocrite. Both sides of me were in dead earnest. I was no more myself when I laid aside restraint and plunged in shame than when I labored in the eye of day at the furtherance of knowledge or the relief of sorrow and suffering. And it chanced that the direction of my scientific studies, which led wholly toward the mystic and the transcendental, reacted and shed a strong light on this consciousness of the perennial war among my members, the two sides. With every day, and from both sides of my intelligence, the moral and the intellectual, I thus grew steadily nearer to that truth by whose partial discovery I have been doomed to such a dreadful shipwreck, that man is not truly one, but truly two. I say two because the state of my own knowledge does not pass beyond that point. Others will follow, others will outstrip me on the same lines, and I hazard to guess that man will be ultimately known for a mere polity of multifarious, incongruous, and independent denizens. I, for my part, from the nature of my life, advanced infallibly in one direction, and in one direction only. It was on the moral side, and in my own person, that I learned to recognize the thorough and primitive duality of man. I saw that of the two natures that contended in the field of my consciousness, even if I could rightly be said to be either, it was only because I was radically both. And from an early date, even before the course of my scientific discoveries had begun to suggest the most naked possibility of such a miracle, I had learned to dwell with pleasure as a beloved daydream on the thought of the separation of these elements. If each, I told myself, could be housed in separate identities, life would be relieved of all that was unbearable. The unjust might go his way, delivered from the aspirations and remorse of his more upright twin, and the just could walk steadfastly and securely up on his upward path, doing the good things in which he found his pleasure, and no longer exposed to disgrace and penitence by the hands of this extraneous evil. was the curse of mankind, that these incongruous faggots were thus bound together, that in the agonized womb of consciousness these polar twins should be continually struggling. How then were they disassociated? So step back here in this 19th century speak. Faggots, of course, means sticks and small, thin logs ready for fire kindling. But thin sticks. So, like so. And, of course, we'll get it. I'm going to read some Holmes coming up in a couple weeks. It's going to be cool, like really cool. With a snake in it and some danger and, London and whatever. And they keep saying ejaculate, and of course we're not really actually ejaculating. We are just yelling. We're just going to say something suddenly, and then that's an ejaculate. So, oops. So, clean up. Right? Oh, I don't know. Any case, I was so far. Hey, Dre. Dre, what's going on? Good to see you, Dre. I was so far in my reflections when, as I have said, a sidelight began to shine upon the subject from the laboratory table. I began to perceive more deeply than it has ever yet been stated the trembling immateriality, the mist-like transience of this seemingly of this seemingly so solid body in which we walk attired. Certain agents I found to have the power to shake and pluck back that fleshly vestment, even as wind might toss the curtains of a pavilion. For two good reasons, I will not enter deeply into this scientific branch for my confession. First, because I have been made to learn that the doom and burden of our life is bound forever on man's shoulders, and when the attempt is made to cast it off, it but returns upon us with a more unfamiliar and more awful pressure. Second, because, as my narrative will make, alas, too evident, my discoveries were incomplete. Enough, then, that I not only recognize my natural body from the mere aura of effulgence of certain of the powers that made up my spirit, but managed to compound a drug by which these powers should be dethroned from their supremacy and a second form and countenance substituted, none the less natural to me because they were the expression and bore the stamp of lower elements in my soul. I hesitated long before I put this theory into the test of practice. I knew well that I risked death, for any drug that so potently controlled and shook the very fortress of identity might, by the least scruple of an overdose, or at least the least inopportunity in the moment of exhibition, utterly blot out that immaterial tabernacle which I looked to it to change. But the temptation of a discovery so singular and profound at last came over the suggestions of alarm. I had long since prepared my tincture. I purchased it at once from a firm of wholesale chemists, a large quantity of a particular salt, which I knew from my experiments to be the last ingredient required, and late one accursed night I compounded the elements, watched them boil and smoke together in the glass, and when the ebullition had subsided with a strong glow of courage, I drank off the potion. The most racking pangs succeeded, a grinding on the bones, a deadly nausea, a horror of the spirit that cannot be exceeded at the hour of birth or death. Then these agonies began swiftly to subside, and I came to myself as if out of a great sickness. There was something strange in my sensation, something indescribably new, and from its very novelty incredibly sweet. I felt younger, lighter, happier in body. Within, I was conscious of a heady recklessness, a current of disordered sensual images, running like a mill race. In my fancy, a solution of the bonds of obligation, an unknown but not an innocent freedom of the soul. I knew myself at the first breath of this new life to be more wicked, tenfold more wicked, sold a slave to my original evil, and the thought in that moment braced and delighted me like wine. I stretched out my hands, exulting in the freshness of these sensations, and in the act, I was suddenly aware that I had lost in stature. There was no mirror at that date in my room. That which stands beside me as I write was brought there later on, and for the very purpose of these transformations. The night, however, was far gone into the morning. The morning, black as it was nearly ripe for the conception of the day. The inmates of my house were locked in the most rigorous hours of slumber, and I determined, flushed as I was, with hope and triumph, to venture in my new shape as far as to my bedroom. I crossed the yard, wherein the constellations looked down upon me. I could have thought with wonder the first creature of that sort that their unsleeping vigilance had yet disclosed to them. I stole through the corridors, a stranger in my own house, and coming to my room, I saw for the first time the appearance of Edward Hyde. I must here speak by theory alone, saying not that which I know, but that which I suppose to be most probable, the evil side of my nature to which I had now transferred the stamping efficacy was less robust and less developed than the good which I had just opposed. Again, in the course of my life, which had been, after all, 9/10 a life of effort, virtue, and control, it had been much less exercised and much less exhausted. And hence, as I think, it came about that Edward Hyde was so much smaller, lighter, and slighter, and younger than Henry Jekyll. Even as good shone upon the countenance of the one, evil was written broadly and plainly on the face of the other. Evil, besides which I must still believe to be the lethal side of man, had left on that body an imprint of deformity and decay, and yet when I looked upon that ugly idol in the glass, I was conscious of no repugnance, rather of a leap of welcome. This too was myself. It seemed natural and human. In my eyes it bore a livelier image of the spirit. It seemed more express and single than the imperfect and divided countenance I had been hitherto accustomed to call my own. And in so far, I was doubtless right. I have observed that when I wore the semblance of Edward Hyde, none could come near to me at first without a visible misgiving of the flesh. This, as I take it, was because all human beings as we meet them are commingled out of good and evil, and Edward Hyde, alone in the ranks of mankind, was pure evil. There he is. Pure evil. And yeah, he's made in the mid-century style. Because it's a thing, man. It's fun. This guy can draw right in that weird style. And, hey, Jay, what's up, bro? So, isn't he cool looking? So my friend John Fair of Kilowatts fame made this, and he hasn't figured out how to sell it yet. And, I don't know, man. You know, I was thinking of maybe doing a giveaway, but I'm not sure how to, like, actually mail it to you. I mean, like, the post office would probably fold it, you know? And you'd get it, you'd receive it as, like, a crumpled up wad. I don't know how to do this, but, so I printed this on photographic paper. Hey, bro, good to see you. Anyway, so I printed this on photographic paper. Here is what it looks like on regular paper. Isn't it crazy? This is how it goes. And then you're supposed to, right, print out on cardstock paper. Yeah, right? So, anyway, it's like a model. But, like, once you get the PDF, there's nothing to keep you from sharing it from a bunch of people. And he probably needs like $5 per PDF or whatever. I don't know how we're going to do it. Well, we're going to figure that out, and I'll let you know how the whole project continues. I just wanted to say, I'm taking a break. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to say that I've been working pretty hard these past few days, going through a number of stories, and I've got us figured out. I've got a great. It's like I've just got a great plan for us all the way through the new year, and it's going to include Moroccans in space. And I can't share it with you just yet, but when I post the question mark, I need you to show up because it's going to be cool. You're going to like it. It's not scary. It's actually, kind of sweet and sad. It's about identity. It's about color. It's about the cosmos. It's about the self. It's about light. It's about many things. It's a magical text, and I want you to love it. So I'll read it to you very sweetly. It's not yet published, so I cannot tell you the title of it. I'm looking for a publisher. It's been out to 5 publishers so far and 3 agents, and we're looking. Okay? So it's slowly going to happen. It's going to happen, though. In any case, so we are now continuing with the personal account of Dr. Jekyll. And then we will finish up the night, if we have enough time, which I think we will. Up here is my clock. Over there is my text. Here is you. That's where, when you write to me, I see it over here. So that's when I look over here. And then that's where my Dr. Jekyll, or no, Dr. Hyde. How do you say Hyde with a Edinburgh accent? I'm not even sure. I don't know. Let's see, Scottish accent. I lingered but for a moment in the mirror. Adam Laxton Hyde, we're Mr. Hyde. Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. My friends in Great Britain are going to, I don't know what they call it anymore, Great Britain. Never mind Great Britain. Never mind any of that crap. Just play your guitar, make sure, Head, Mr. Head, ha. Yeah, Moroccans in space. Shh. But it's going to be cool. Susan, yeah, it's going to be cool. It's weird. It's going to have, there is a non-binary character as the protagonist, but it's not like, it's not silly, and it doesn't even focus on being non-binary. It's just, that's what this person is. You know what I'm saying? It's not like, even there was an Ursula Le Guin, I remember reading a few chapters. It's not even like that, of like where it's a planet of people who don't have defined gender. No, it's just a person who doesn't have, who just hates toxic masculinity and resents the overbearing toxic femininity as well. Right? Okay, that's fair, right? This person doesn't want to be either, and this person's kind of slim, extra slim, and has facial hair, and happens to have a crush on a little gal named Darla. But they don't even know that they're like actually into Darla until actually they're into Darla. Like, whoa, how did that happen? Anyway, okay. Dang. I've taken 2 breaks so far. I'm sorry. I'm just really... like I asked... I'm just in a weird mood today, I guess. I've been thinking about children's novels. And I've been thinking about... I mean, today we have... For children's novels, we have a lot of... like magic and stuff. And like, what's that? Harry Potter and whatever that stuff is, right? But when I was a boy, I used to read Crazy Horse, Hardy Boys, and Paul Zindel, like Tales of a Loser, Tales of a Loner. That's what I used to read when I was a little boy, like 10, 12, something like 10. Crazy Horse. And I read Tarzan, I read Hardy Boys, I read a lot of novels. They meant a lot to me, formative years. I Am the Cheese, I forget who wrote that. And I read Wifey. I read Judy Blume. We were assigned like Green Tomatoes, I don't remember really reading that. I don't really remember reading that. I think I just threw it away. I don't know. But I remember Wifey. That was hot, to read as a young man, coming into my own sexuality. It was interesting. So, continuing with the text, okay? I wish I could just, jam on and talk with you guys, forever, but let's do some talking on private message. Let's hang out, okay? I lingered but a moment at the mirror. The second and conclusive experiment had yet to be attempted. It remained to be seen if I had lost my identity beyond redemption and must flee before daylight from a house that was no longer mine. And hurrying back to my cabinet, I once more prepared and drank the cup, once more suffered the pangs of disillusion, and came to myself one more with the character, the stature, and the face of Henry Jekyll. And that night I had come to the fatal crossroads. I had approached my discovery in a more noble spirit. Had I risked the experiment while under the empire of generous or pious aspirations, all must have been otherwise. And from these agonies of death and birth, I had come forth an angel instead of a fiend. The drug had no discriminating action. It was neither diabolical nor divine, but it shook the doors of the prison house of my disposition, and like the captives of the Philippi, that which stood within ran forth. At that time my virtue slumbered, my evil kept awake, my ambition was alert and swift to seize the occasion, and the thing that was projected was Edward Hyde. Hence, although I had now 2 characters as well as 2 appearances, one was wholly evil and the other was still the old Henry Jekyll, that incongruous compound of whose reformation and improvement I had already learned to despair. The movement was thus wholly toward the worse. Even at that time, I had not conquered my aversions to the dryness of life, of study. I would still be merrily disposed at time, and as my pleasures were, to say the least, undignified, and I was not only well known and highly considered, but growing toward the elderly man, this incoherency of my life was daily growing more unwelcome. It was on this side that my new power tempted me until I fell in slavery. I had but to drink the cup, to doff at once the body of the noted professor, and to assume, like a thick cloak, that of Edward Hyde. I smiled at the notion. It seemed to me at the time to be humorous, and I made my preparations with the most duteous care. I took and furnished that house in Soho to which Hyde was tracked by the police and engaged as a housekeeper, a creature whom I knew well to be silent and unscrupulous. On the other side, I announced to my servants that a Mr. Hyde, whom I described, pleasure's undignified. Thank you, Susan. You're catching it. He's undignified. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe he's gay, you know, or maybe he's like something. It's something. Maybe he's got a longing for BDSM. But you know what? That's all healthy. I mean, that's healthy. You got to get it out. You got to get that satisfied in a healthy manner and not actually hurt people, but you can get it done. And sometimes you need to hire someone to help you with that need. But if you don't, you will explode. So, but there's, I guess if you need to be private about it, that's your right. You know, that's fine. But there is a thing for that, and it's all okay, and it's healthy. And to be accepting of it is to be healthy. And to try to refuse that, you will punish yourself. So, on the other side, I announced to my servants that a Mr. Hyde, whom I described, was to have full liberty and power about my house in the square, and to parry mishaps. And I even called and made myself a familiar object in my second character. I drew up that will to which he so much objected, so that if anything befell me in the person of Mr. Dr. Jekyll, I could enter on that of Edward Hyde without pecuniary loss. And thus fortified, as I suppose, on every side, I began to profit by the strange immunities of my position. Men have before hired bravos to transact their crimes, while their own person and reputation sat under shelter. I was the first that ever did so for his pleasures. I was the first that could plod in the public eye with a load of genial respectability, and in a moment, like a schoolboy, strip off these lendings and spring headlong into the sea of liberty. But for me, in my impenetrable mantle, the safety was complete. Think of it. I did not even exist. But let me escape into my laboratory door, give me but a second or two to mix and swallow the draught that I had always standing ready, and whatever he had done, Edward Hyde would pass away, like the stain of breath upon a mirror, and here, in his stead, quietly at home, trimming the midnight lamp in his study, a man who could afford to laugh at suspicion would be Henry Jekyll. So this is how he plays. He doesn't want to answer for anything, because he could kill the character who did the bad deed with the draft, with the potion, and just drink it. So what if we could get drunk to be Edward Hyde and get drunk to be Henry Jekyll? That's all we would ask for, right? Isn't that all we need? The pleasures which I made haste to seek in my disguise were, as I have said, undignified. I would scarce use a harder term. But in the hands of Edward Hyde, they soon began to turn toward the monstrous. When I would come back from these excursions, I was often plunged into a kind of wonder at my vicarious depravity, this familiar that I called out of my own soul and sent forth alone to do his good pleasure, was a being inherently malign and villainous, his every act and thought centered on his self, a drinking pleasure with the bestial avidity from any degree of torture to another, relentless like a man of stone. Henry Jekyll stood at times aghast before the acts of Edward Hyde. But the situation was apart from ordinary laws and insidiously relaxed the grasp of conscience. It was Hyde, after all, and Hyde alone, that was guilty. Jekyll Jekyll was no worse. He woke again to his good qualities, seemingly unimpaired, and he would even make haste, when it was possible, to undo the evil done by Mr. Hyde, and thus his conscience slumbered. Into the details of the infamy at which I thus connived, for even now I can scarce grant that I committed it, I have no design of entering. I mean but to point out the warnings and the successive steps in which my chastisement approached. I met with one accident, which, as it brought on no consequence, I shall no more than mention. An act of cruelty to a child aroused against me the anger of a passerby, whom I recognized the other day in the person of your kinsman, the doctor, and the child's family joined him. There were moments when I feared for my life, and at last, in order to pacify their too just resentment, Edward Hyde had to bring them to the door and pay them in a check drawn in the name of Henry Jekyll, or Jekyll. But this danger was easily eliminated from the future by opening an account at another bank in the name of Edward Hyde himself, and when, by sloping my own hand backward, I had supplied my double with his own signature, I thought I sat beyond the reach of fate. Some 2 months before the murder of Mr. Sir Danvers, I had been out for one of my adventures, had returned at a late hour, and woke the next day in bed with somewhat odd sensations. It was in vain I looked about me. In vain I saw the decent furniture and tall proportions of my room in the square. In vain did I recognize the pattern of the bed curtains and the design of the mahogany frame. Something still kept insisting that I was not where I was, that I had not awakened where I seemed to be, but in the little room in Soho, where I was accustomed to sleep in the body of Edward Hyde. I smiled to myself, and in my psychological way began lazily to inquire into the elements of this illusion, occasionally, even as I did so, dropping back into comfortable morning doze. I was still so engaged when, in one of my more wakeful moments, my eyes fell upon my hand. Now the hand of Henry Jekyll, as you have often remarked, was professional in shape and size. It was large, firm, white, and comely. But the hand which I now saw clearly enough, in the yellow light of the mid-London morning, lying half shut on the bedclothes, was lean, corded, knuckly, of a dusky pallor, and thickly shaded with a swart growth of hair. It was the hand of Edward Hyde. I must have stared upon it for near half a minute, sunk as I was in the mere stupidity of wonder, before terror woke me up in my breast, as sudden, as startling as the crash of cymbals, and bounding from my bed, I rushed to the mirror. At the sight that met my eyes, my blood was changed into something exquisitely thin and icy. Yes, I had gone to bed Henry Jekyll. I had awakened as Edward Hyde. How was this to be explained? I asked myself, and then, with another bound of terror, how was it to be remedied? It was well on in the morning. The servants were up. All my drugs were in the cabinet. A long journey down 2 pairs of stairs, through the back passage, across the open court, and through the anatomical theatre, from where I was then standing, horror-struck. It might indeed be possible to cover my face, but of what use was that when I was unable to conceal the alteration in my stature? And then, with an overpowering sweetness of relief, it came back upon my mind that the servants were already Used to the coming and going of my second self, I had soon dressed as well as I was able in clothes of my own size, had soon passed through the house, where Bradshaw stared and drew back at seeing Mr. Hyde at such an hour and in such a strange array, and 10 minutes later Dr. Jekyll had returned to his own shape, and was sitting down, with a darkened brow, to make a feint of breakfasting. Small indeed was my appetite. This inexplicable incident, this reversal of my previous experience, seemed like the Babylonian finger on the wall, to be spelling out letters of my judgment, and I began to reflect more seriously than ever before on the issues and possibilities of my double existence. That part of me, which I had the power of projecting, had lately been much exercised and nourished. It had seemed to me of late as though the body of Edward Hyde had grown in stature, as though, when I wore that form, I were conscious of a more generous tide of blood. I began to spy a danger that, if this were much prolonged, the balance of my nature might be permanently overthrown. The power of voluntary change might be forfeited. And the character of Edward Hyde become irrevocably mine. The power of the drug that had not been always equally displayed. Once, very early in my career, it had totally failed me. Since then, I had been obliged on more than one occasion to double, and once, with infinite risk of death, to triple the amount. And these rare uncertainties had cast hitherto the sole shadow of my contentment. Now, however, and in the light of that morning's accident, I was led to remark that, whereas in the beginning the difficulty had been to throw off the body of Jekyll, it had of late gradually but decidedly transferred itself to the other side. All things, therefore, seemed to point to this, that I was slowly losing hold of my original self and better self, and becoming slowly incorporated with my second self, and the worse. And between these two, I now felt I had to choose. My two natures had memory in common, but all other faculties were most unequally shared between them. Jekyll, who was composite, now with the most sensitive apprehensions, now with a greedy gusto, projected and shared the pleasures and adventures of Mr. Hyde. But Hyde was indifferent to Jekyll, but remembered him as the mountain bandit remembers the cavern in which he conceals himself from pursuit. Jekyll had more than a father's interest. Hyde had more than a son's indifference. To cast in my lot with Jekyll was to die to those appetites which I had long secretly indulged and had of late begun to pamper. To cast it in with Hyde was to die 1,000 interests and aspirations, and to become at a blow and forever despised and friendless. The bargain might appear unequal, but there was still another consideration in the scales, for while Jekyll could suffer smartingly in the fires of abstinence, Hyde would be not even conscious of all that he had lost. Strange as my circumstances were, the terms of this debate are as old and commonplace as humanity. Much the same inducements and alarms cast the die for any tempted and trembling sinner, and it fell out with me, as it falls with so vast a majority of my fellows, that I choose the better part, and was found wanting in the strength to keep to it. Yes, I preferred the elderly and discontented contented doctor, surrounded by friends and cherishing honest hopes, and bade a resolute farewell to the liberty, the comparative youth, the light step, leaping impulses, and secret pleasures that I had enjoyed in the disguise of Hyde. I made this choice, perhaps with some unconscious reservation, for I neither gave up the house in Soho, nor destroyed the clothes of Edward Hyde, which still lay ready in my cabinet. For 2 months, however, I was true to my determination. For 2 months, I led a life of such severity as I had never before attained to, and enjoyed the compensations of an approving conscience. But time began at last to obliterate the freshness of my alarm. The praises of conscience began to grow into a thing. Of course, I began to be tortured with throes and longings as of Hyde struggling after freedom, and at last, in an hour of moral weakness, I once again compounded and swallowed the transforming draught. I do not suppose that when a drunkard reasons with himself upon his vice, he is once out of 500 times affected by the dangers that he runs through his brutish physical insensibility. Neither had I, long as I had considered my position, made enough allowance for the complete moral insensibility and yet insensate readiness to evil, which were the leading characters of Edward Hyde. Yet it was by these that I was punished. My devil had long been caged. He came out roaring. I was conscious, even when I took the draught, of a more unbridled, a more furious propensity to ill. It must have been this, I suppose, that stirred in my soul that tempest of impatience, with which I listened to the civilities of my unhappy victim. I declare, at least, before God, no man morally sane could have been guilty of that crime upon so pitiful a provocation that I struck in no more reasonable spirit than in which a sick child may break a plaything. But I had voluntarily stripped myself of all those balancing instincts by which even the worst of us continues to walk with some degree of steadiness among temptations, and in my case, to be tempted, however slightly, was to fall. Instantly the spirit of hell awoke in me, and raged with the transport of glee. I mauled the unresisting body, tasting delight from every blow, and it was not until weariness had begun to succeed that I was suddenly, in top fit of my delirium, struck through the heart by a cold thrill of terror. A mist dispersed. I saw my life to be forfeit, and fled from the scene of these excesses, at once glorying and trembling. My lust of evil gratified and stimulated, my lust of life screwed to the topmost peg. I ran to the house in Soho, and, to make assurance doubly sure, destroyed my papers. Thence I sent through the lamp-lit streets, in the same divided ecstasy of mind, gloating on my crime, light-heartedly devising others in the future, and yet still hastening and still hearkening in my wake for the steps of the avenger. Hyde had a song upon his lips as he compounded the draught, and as he drank it he pledged the dead man. The pangs of transformation had not done tearing him before Henry Jekyll, with streaming tears of gratitude and remorse, had fallen upon his knees and lifted his clasped hands to God. The veil of self-indulgence was rent from head to foot. I saw my life as whole. I followed it up from the days of childhood, when I had walked with my father's hand, and through the self-denying toils of my professional life, to arrive again and again with the same sense of unreality at the damned horrors of the evening. I could have screamed aloud. I sought with tears and prayers to smother down the crowd of hideous images and sounds with which my memory swarmed against me. And still, between the petitions, the ugly face of my iniquity stared into my soul, as the acuteness of this remorse began to die away, it was succeeded by a sense of joy. The problem of my conduct was solved. Hyde was thenceforth impossible. Whether I could or not, I was now confined to the better part of my existence, and oh, how I rejoiced to think of it. With what willing humility I embraced anew the restrictions of natural life. For with what sincere renunciation I locked the door by which I had so often gone and come, and ground the key under my heel. The next day came the news that the murderer had been overlooked, that the guilt of Hyde was patent to the world, and that the victim was a man in high public estimation. It was not only a crime, it had been a tragic folly. I think I was glad to know it. I think I was glad to have my better impulses thus buttressed and guarded by the terrors of the scaffold. Jekyll was now my city of refuge. Let but Hyde peep out an instant, and the hands of all men would be raised to take and slay him. I resolved in my future conduct to redeem the past. And I can say with honesty that my resolve was fruitful of some good. You know yourself how earnestly, in the last months of last year, I labored to relieve suffering. You know that much was done for others, and that the days passed quietly, almost happily for myself. Nor can I truly say that I wearied of this beneficent and innocent life. I think instead that I daily enjoyed it more completely. But I was still cursed with my duality of purpose. And as the first edge of my penitence wore off, the lower side of me, so long indulged, so recently chained down, it began to growl for license. Not that I had dreamed of resuscitating Hyde. The bare idea of that would startle me into frenzy. No, I was in my own person that I was once more tempted to trifle with my conscience, and it was as an ordinary secret sinner that I at last fell before the assaults of temptation. There comes an end to all things. The most capacious measure is filled at last, and this brief condescension to my evil finally destroyed the balance of my soul, and yet I was not alarmed. The fall seemed natural, like a return to the old days before I had made my discovery. It was a fine, clear January day, wet underfoot where the frost had melted, but cloudless overhead, and the Regent's Park was full of sheep. Doesn't say that in the text, but I'm just saying it was full of sheep. But it was full of chirrupings and sweet with spring odors. I sat in the sun on a bench, the animal within me, licking the chops of memory, the spiritual side a little drowsed, promising subsequent penitence, but not yet moved to begin. After all, I reflected, I was like my neighbors. And then I smiled, comparing myself with other men, comparing my act of goodwill to the lazy cruelty of their neglect, and at the very moment of that vainglorious thought, a qualm came over me, a horrid nausea, and the most deadly shuddering. These passed away and left me faint. Then, as in its turn, faintness subsided, I began to be aware of a change in the temper of my thoughts, a greater boldness, a contempt of danger, a solution of the bonds of obligation. I looked down, my clothes hung formlessly on my shrunken limbs, the hand that lay on my knee was corded and hairy. I was once more Edward Hyde. A moment before I had been safe of all men's respect, wealthy, beloved, the cloth laying for me in the dining room at home, and now I was the common quarry of mankind, hunted, houseless, a known murderer, and thrall to the gallows. So this... Are you guys still with me? Everybody with me? You with me? You've been listening to the story so far? So he's sitting in a public park, and if you... I don't know if your video can pick it up, but my light here, this, I don't know, that light, it's shimmering. And so every time that we're about to have fog, or every time we do have fog, my lights, they kind of shimmer like that. I've told the landlord. He says there's nothing wrong with the lights. I haven't argued with him yet. Anyway, if you're still with me, and if you've been here, right on. Hey, Mike, are you like frying stuff in the garage right now? Is that what's going on, Mike? Is that why you listen to Storytelling Live, so you can fry shit in the garage? Crunch it down and like listen to Storytelling Live? That's cool, though. But what I'm thinking is, if you've been here since the beginning, and if you haven't, you can go ahead and just rewind. You can find out what I'm dealing with this week, and what you might deal with at any time in your life. That you might know, most people will know someone who needs help and support because they're... Okay, this guy isn't actually addicted to alcohol, right? He's not actually an alcoholic, but he actually probably has some... So he probably has some Native American blood or something like that, and... No, I'm not exaggerating, but I think he's got some Native American blood, and that creates, when alcohol hits his system, it's like a blood toxin. It turns him into Mr. Hyde. And so I'm thinking, like, so Dr. Jekyll is sitting in Regent's Park right now, and he's trying to have a wonderful afternoon, and he feels somewhat relaxed. And all of a sudden, he feels himself feeling like his conscious self feels sort of sleepy, and he seems to go into a reverie, and he wakes up and his hands have changed. And the hand that's like resting on his own thigh is unfamiliar to him. Well, it's familiar. It's the hand that he doesn't want to see. It's Mr. Hyde. So Jekyll accidentally turns into Hyde. So what if you could sit in a public park in the same manner and just not even have any alcohol with you, but you just find yourself drunk beyond normal measure? That's what this moment is. My reason wavered, but it did not fail me utterly. I have more than once observed that in my second character my faculties seemed sharpened to a point, and my spirits more tensely elastic. Thus it came about that where Jekyll perhaps might have succumbed, Hyde rose to the importance of the moment. My drugs were in one of the presses of my cabinet. How was I to reach them? That was the problem that, crushing my temples and my hands, I set myself to resolve. The laboratory door I had closed. If I sought to enter by the house, my own servants would consign me to the gallows. I saw I must employ another hand, and thought of Lanyon. How was he to be reached? How persuaded? Supposing that I escaped capture in the streets, how was I to make my way into his presence, and how should I, an unknown and displeasing visitor, prevail from the famous physician to rifle the study of his colleague, Dr. Jekyll? Then I remembered that of my original character, one part remained to me. I could write in my own hand. And once I had conceived that kindling spark, the way that I must follow became lighted up from end to end. Thereupon I arranged my clothes as best I could, and summoning a passing hansom, drove on to a hotel on Portland Street, the name of which I chanced to remember. At my appearance, which was indeed comical enough, however tragic a fate these garments covered, the driver could not conceal his mirth. I gnashed my teeth upon him with a gust of devilish fury, and the smile withered from his face, happily for him, yet more happily for myself, for in an instant I had certainly dragged him from his perch. At the inn, as I entered, I looked about me with so black a countenance as made the attendants tremble. I did not Not a look did they exchange in my presence, but obsequiously took my orders, led me to a private room, and brought me wherewithal to write. Hyde, in danger of his life, was a creature new to me, shaken with inordinate anger, strung to the pitch of murder, lusting to inflict pain. Yet the creature was astute, mastered in his fury with a great effort of the will, composed in his two important letters, one to Lanyon, the other to Poole, and that he might receive actual evidence of their being posted, set them out with directions that they should be registered. Thenceforward he sat all day over the fire of the private room, gnawing his nails. There he died, sitting alone with his fears. The waiter visibly quailing before his eye, and thence, when the night was fully come, he set forth in the corner of a closed tab, and was driven to and fro about the streets of the city. He, I cannot say I, that child of hell had nothing human, nothing lived in him but fear and hatred. And when, at last, thinking the driver had begun to grow suspicious, he discharged the cab, and ventured on foot, attired in his misfitting clothes, an object marked out for observation, into the midst of the nocturnal passengers, these two base passions raged within him. Like a tempest, he walked fast, hunted by his fears, chattering to himself, skulking through the less frequented thoroughfares, counting the minutes that had still divided him from midnight. Once a woman spoke to him, offering, I think, a box of lights. He smote her in the face, and she fled. When I came to myself at Lanyon's, the horror of my old friend perhaps affected me somewhat. I do not know. It was at least but a drop in the sea to the abhorrence with which I look back upon these hours. A change had come over me. It was no longer the fear of the gallows. It was the horror of being Hyde that racked me. I received Dr. Lanyon's condemnation partly in a dream. It was partly in a dream that I came home to my own house and got into bed. I slept after the prostration of the day with a stringent and profound slumber which not even the nightmares that wrung me could avail to break. News flash, I just heard that my friend at the hospital had been trying to tear out the IV in his arm that was meant to give him fluids to hydrate his body and to dilute the concentration of alcohol in his blood system. He has now accepted that, and he has now resigned himself to sleep, and they have given him several they've given him they've given him whatever it's called, that makes him relaxed, to help him sleep. And with the amount of toxicity that's in his blood, and they have not pumped his stomach, but with the amount of toxicity of alcohol in his blood and the sleep medication, I feared that he might, well, I don't know, I guess they will. He might not be long for this world. I just have to remind myself that to not be surprised if I don't see him again. But if I do see him again, I've got a guitar for him. So, okay. That was intermission, like the third intermission. That's what's happening now. I just got a text flashed on my screen as I was reading to you. I still hated and feared the thought of the brute that slept within me. This is so him. Every second of this, every iota of this is like what he's going through right now. Except he prefers to be Hyde, and he prefers to die as Hyde. which is, that's a big sandwich to swallow for everyone who is not him. Okay. Okay, people. Thanks, Jay. I awoke in the morning, shaken, weakened, but refreshed. I still hated and feared the thought of the brute that slept within me. And I had not, of course, forgotten the appalling dangers of the day before, but I was once more at home, in my own house, and close to my drugs, and the gratitude for my escape shone so strong in my soul that it almost rivaled the brightness of hope. I was stepping leisurely across the court after breakfast, drinking in the chill of the air with pleasure, when I was seized again with those indescribable sensations that heralded the change, and I had but the time to gain the shelter of my cabinet before I was once again raging and freezing with the passions of Hyde. It took on this occasion a double dose to recall me to myself in the last 6 hours after, as I sat looking sadly into the fire. The pangs returned, and the drug had to be re-administered. In short, from that day forth, it seemed only by great effort, as of gymnastics, and only under the immediate stimulation of the drug, that I was able to wear the countenance of Jekyll. At all hours of the day and night I would be taken with the premonitory shudder. Above all, if I slept or even dozed for a moment in my chair, it was always as Hyde that I awakened. Under the strain of this continually impending doom, and by the sleeplessness to which I now condemned myself, even beyond what I had thought possible to humanity, I became, in my own person, a creature, eaten up and emptied by a fever, languidly weak, both in body and mind, and solely occupied by one thought, the horror of my other self. But when I slept, or when the virtue of the medicine wore off, I would leap almost without transition, for the pangs of transformation grew daily less marked, into the possession of a fancy brimming with the images of terror, a soul boiling with causeless hatreds, and a body that seemed not strong enough to contain the raging energies of life. The powers of Hyde seemed to have grown with the sickliness of Jekyll, and certainly the hate that now divided them was equal on each side. With Jekyll, it was the thing of vital instinct. He had now seen the full deformity of that creature that shared with him some of the phenomena of consciousness, and was co-heir with him to death, and beyond these links of community, which in themselves made the most poignant part of his distress, he thought of Hyde, for all his energy of life, as of something not only hellish, but inorganic. This was the shocking thing, but that the slime of the pit seemed to utter cries and voices, that the amorphous dust gesticulated and sinned, and what was dead and had no shape should usurp the offices of life. And this again, that insurgent horror was knit to him closer than a wife, closer than an eye, and caged in his flesh, where he heard it mutter and felt it struggle to be born, and every hour of weakness and in the confidence of slumber prevailed against him and deposed him out of life. The hatred of Hyde for Jekyll was of a different order. His terror of the gallows drove him continually to commit temporary suicide, and that's what being drunk is. And that's what being drunk beyond your belief. He's not actually addicted to alcohol, but he knows he can die with alcohol. And so he drinks. Okay. Jekyll is not... his terror of the gallows drove him continually to commit temporary suicide, and return to his subordinate station of a part instead of a person. But he loathed the necessity, he loathed the despondency into which Jekyll was now fallen, and he resented the dislike with which he was himself regarded. Hence the ape-like tricks that he would play me, scrawling in my own hand blasphemies on the pages of my books, burning the letters and destroying the portrait of my father. And indeed, had it not been for his fear of death, he would long ago have ruined himself in order to involve me in the ruin. But his love of life is wonderful. I go further. I, who sicken and freeze at the mere thought of him, when I recall the abjection and passion of this attachment, and when I know how he fears my power to cut him off by suicide, I find it in my heart to pity him. It's useless, and the time awfully fails me to prolong this description. No one has ever suffered such torments. Let that suffice. And even to these habit brought no, not alleviation, but a certain callousness of soul, a certain acquiescence of despair, and my punishment might have gone on for years, but for the last calamity which has now fallen, which has finally severed me from my own face and nature, my provision of the salt, which had never been renewed since the date of my first experiment had begun to run low. I sent out for a fresh supply and mixed the draught. The ebullition followed, and the first change of color, not the second. I drank it anyway, and it was without efficiency. You will learn from Poole how I have London ransacked. It was in vain. And I am now persuaded that my first supply was impure, and that it was that unknown impurity of the first batch of salts which lent efficacy to the first draft. So the problem that he discovers here is that his first batch of very particular kind of salts was impure, and that's what helped the transformation. And so he goes over all the chemists of all of London, looking for the correct draft. Oi, where's me draft? I don't even know where me draft is, 'cause I need the pure salts. No, buddy, you need actually the impure salts, and that's what brought on the initial transformation. Oi, I need my impure salts. He could never get the same impurity, no matter how hard he looks. If it was just barely impure to the correct effect, that's what he needed, and he could no longer find it in all of London, and that's how he got trapped. I am now finishing this statement under the influence. Okay. About a week has passed, and I am now finishing this statement under the influence of the last of the old powders. This, then, is the last time, short of a miracle, that Henry Jekyll can think his own thoughts or see his own face, now how sadly altered, in the looking-glass. Nor must I delay too long to bring my writing to an end, for if my narrative has hitherto escaped destruction, it has been by a combination of great prudence and great good luck. Should the throes of change take me in the act of writing it, Hyde will tear it into pieces. But if some time shall have elapsed after I had laid it by, his wonderful selfishness and circumscription to the moment will probably save it once again from the action of his ape-like spite. And indeed, the doom that is closing on us both has already changed and crushed him. Half an hour from now, when I shall again and forever re-endue that hated personality, I know now how I shall sit shuddering and weeping in my chair, or continue with the most strained and fear-struck ecstasy of listening to pace up and down this room, my last earthly refuge, and give ear to every sound of menace. Will Hyde die upon the scaffold? Will he find courage to release himself at the last moment? God knows. I am careless. This is my true hour of death, and what is to follow concerns another, and not myself. Here, then, as I lay down the pen and proceed to seal up my confession, I bring the life of that unhappy Henry Jekyll to an end. That actually concludes the entire novella. That's the last word. And perhaps there are very few of you out there still listening, and that's okay. I don't mind. This is just for us, this moment. And here I will read a little bit from Robert Louis Stevenson himself. Thanks, Jay. Glad you're out there, bro. It's weird, man. It's just a weird life, and just knowing people, I don't know, man. Yeah, that was it. So in 1892, a few years later, he wrote, oh my God, it's way too close to home. Every bit of this text reminds me of the man I dropped off at the hospital today. And he will wake up as a Dr. Jekyll, but he does not want to be a Dr. Jekyll any longer. It's a different case. It's because the will is totally different. You get me? He doesn't want to be Jekyll any longer. He will be Hyde, and he will be toxically Hyde. And the Hyde that he would rather be is basically actually a comatose being. It's comatose. I saw him. Since when can you not focus your eyes properly? Since when can you not actually take a piss on your own? Since when do you resign the function of swallowing your own saliva? Since when do you allow it to spill forth from the front of your mouth as you're walking, as you're looking at your friend? When you pee yourself, your pants are full of pee, yeah? But when he had peed himself, not only his pants were soaked, but his shirt was soaked up to the shoulders. So, no one will listen to this. No one will hear. It is sweet oblivion. Sweet oblivion. It's what awaits us all. And if some of us are chomping at the bit to get there, there is a time when we must say, I will no longer stand in your way. So, it's a deep one. It's a moral issue, as is Jekyll and Hyde. Anyway, so for those of you who actually, do you guys know Stevenson that well? Do you know Stevenson? Well, I read into him a little bit, and I discovered that he was actually much like someone else you might know of. I mean, of course, we don't know him personally. But a man filled with fear, filled with fear, day and night. A writer from Providence, Rhode Island, and Red Hook, New York. Lovecraft. So part of what Lovecraft was experiencing was not only just like a rabid xenophobia and a hatred of probably just about anything cool, cute, or funny on the earth. He was also plagued by nightmares. So I'm not sure if you guys are aware of Lovecraft's nightmare. Yeah, you know. So Mike knows. Well, I didn't know until I studied it more that Stevenson was actually riddled. Really? I have no idea. You know, maybe he felt gay. Who knows? And of course, he would hate himself. You know, Lovecraft hated and feared everything, even his toenails, you know. I mean, of course, if he was going to be gay, he'd be like, oh my God, I'm gay. Ah. I'm sorry. I don't mean to laugh. I mean, I guess for some people it's a traumatic experience to understand that you're sexually attracted to your own gender. I mean, what could be more natural, right? I mean, it's your own gender. Why would it be an opposite gender? Like, whoa, what's the other gender? What are these several other genders that we actually have moving into our consciousness at this point? This is the Aquarian age, man. There's more than one gender. In any case, so I'm going to read right now a little bit from Chapter on Dreams by Robert Louis Stevenson, 1892. Let's see, because we're going to learn about him being plagued by nightmares, and that is exactly how, you know, I know, Susan, I'm sorry. It is. It was a big taboo. It was a big taboo. And I'm probably not being sensitive enough. You're right. I know. It's still a big taboo. God. I mean, I can't wait for us to just normalize the multidimensionality of human sexuality. I mean, we have to make room in our hearts for those people who do like BDSM, who actually kind of need it, those people who like gay sex. And of course, I mean, my God, like, why, what is this? Why is it, I mean, humans have been homosexual as long as there have been humans, you know, and it's like, why are they so, I don't know. I'm just ready. I'm ready for all that crap to go away, and the shame and the bullshit. It's just leave it behind, man. I just can't wait for the new way. Anyway, I'm tempted to make a political joke right now, but I am going to hold back, and I'm forming one in my brain, but I'm not going to tell you. I'm just laughing at it in my own mind. Trust me, it was funny. I can't go there, man. All right, this just in any case. So here we are. Robert Louis Stevenson talking about dreams. The past is all of one texture, whether feigned or suffered, whether acted out in 3 dimensions or only witnessed in that small theater of the brain which we keep brightly lighted all night long. After the jets are down and darkness and sleep reign undisturbed in the remainder of the body, there is no distinction on the face of our experiences. One is vivid indeed, and one dull, and one pleasant, and another agonizing to remember. But which of them is what we call true, and which is a dream? And there's not one hair to prove. The past stands on a precarious footing, another straw split in the field of metaphysic, and behold us robbed of it. There is scarce a family that can count 4 generations, but lays a claim to some dormant title or some castle and estate, a claim not prosecutable in any court of law, but flattering to the fancy and the great alleviation of idle hours. A man's claim to his own past is yet less valid. A paper might turn up in proper storybook fashion in the secret drawer of an old ebony secretary and restore your family to its ancient honors and reinstate mine in a certain West Indian islet not far from St. Kitts, as beloved tradition hummed in my young ears, which was once ours and is now unjustly someone else's, and for that matter, in the state of the sugar trade, is not worth anything to anybody. I do not say that these revolutions are likely, but only no man can deny that they are possible, and the past, on the other hand, is lost forever. Our old days and deeds, our old selves, too, and the very world in which these scenes were acted, all brought down to the same faint residuum as a last night's dream, to some incontinuous images, and an echo in the chambers of the brain. Not an hour, not a mood, not a glance of the eye can we revoke. It's all gone, past conjuring, and yet conceive us robbed of it. Conceive that little thread of memory that we trail behind us broken at the pocket's edge. And in what naked nullity should we be left? For we only guide ourselves. We and only know ourselves by these air-painted pictures of the past. And that's memory. Upon these grounds, there are some among us who claim to have lived longer and more richly than our neighbors. When we lay asleep, they claim they were still active. And among the treasures of memory that all men review for their amusement, these count in no second place the harvests of their dreams. And this is where Stevenson is actually describing himself. There is one of this kind whom I have in my eye, and whose case is perhaps unusual enough to be described. He was from a child an ardent and uncomfortable dreamer. When he had a touch of fever at night, and when the room swelled and shrank, and his clothes hanging on a nail now loomed up instant to the bigness of a church, and now drew away to a horror of infinite distance and infinite littleness, the poor soul was very aware of what must follow, and struggled hard against the approaches of that slumber which was the beginning of sorrow. But his struggles were in vain. Sooner or later the nightmare would have him by the throat and pluck him, strangling and screaming, from his sleep. His dreams were at times commonplace enough, at times very strange. At times they were almost formless. He would be haunted, for instance, by nothing more definite than a certain hue of brown, which he did not mind in the least while he was awake, but feared and loathed while he was dreaming. At times, again, they took on every detail of circumstance, and when once he was supposed he must swallow the populous world, and awoke screaming with the horror of the thought. The two chief troubles of his very narrow existence, the practical and everyday trouble of school tasks, and the ultimate and airy one of hell and judgment, were often confounded together into one appalling nightmare. He seemed himself to stand before the great white throne. He was called on, poor little devil, to recite some form of words on which his destiny depended. His tongue stuck, his memory was blank, hell gaped for him. He would wake, clinging to the curtain rod, with his knees to his chin. And what I'm trying to say is the poor gentleman had since been troubled by nothing of the sort. Indeed, his nights were like other men's, now checkered with dreams, and these sometimes charming, sometimes appalling, but except for occasional vividness of no extraordinary kind. I will note one of these occasions ere I pass on to what makes my dreamer truly interesting. It seemed to him that he was on the first floor of a rough hill farm. The room showed some poor efforts at gentility, a carpet upon the floor, a piano, I think, against the wall. But for all these refinements there was no mistaking he was in a moorland place, among hillside people, and set in miles of heather. He looked down from the window upon a bare farmyard that seemed to have been long disused. A great uneasy stillness lay upon the world. There was no sign of the farm folk or any livestock, save from an old brown curly dog of the retriever breed, who sat close in against the wall of the house and seemed to be dozing. Something about this dog disquieted the dreamer. It was quite a nameless feeling, for the beast looked right enough. Indeed, he was so old and dull and dusty and broken down that he should rather have awakened pity. And yet the conviction came and grew upon the dreamer that this was no proper dog at all, but something hellish. A great many dozing summer flies hummed about the yard. And presently the dog thrust forth his paw, caught a fly at his open palm, and carried it to his mouth like an ape, and looking suddenly up at the dreamer in the window, winked to him with one eye. The dream went on. It matters not how it went. It was a good dream, as dreams go. But there was nothing in the sequel worthy of that devilish brown dog. And if the point of interest for me lies partly in that very fact, that having found so singular an incident, my imperfect dreamer should prove unable to carry the tale to a fit end, and fall back on indescribable noises and indiscriminate horrors, it would be different now. He knows his business better. Well, as regards to the dreamer, I can answer that, for he is no less a person than myself. I might have told you from the beginning that only the critics murmur over my consistent egotism, and as far as I am possibly forced to tell you now, I could advance but little farther with my story. And for the little people, well, they're fairies. What shall I say? They're just my brownies, and God bless them, who do one half my work for me while I'm fast asleep, and in all human likelihood do the rest for me as well when I'm wide awake, and fondly suppose I do it for them, for myself. That part which is done while I'm sleeping is the brownies' part, beyond contention. But that which is done when I am up and about is by no means necessarily mine, since all goes to show the brownies have had a hand in it even then. Here is doubt that much concerns my conscience. For myself, what I call my conscious ego, the denizen of the pineal gland, unless he has changed his residence since Descartes, the man with the conscience and the variable bank account, the man with the hat and the boots, the privilege of voting and not carrying his candidate at the general elections, I am sometimes tempted to suppose that he is no storyteller at all, but a creature, as a matter of fact, as any cheesemonger or any cheese, and a realist bemired up to the ears in actuality, so that by that account the whole of my published fiction should be the single-handed product of some fairy, a brownie, some familiar, some unseen collaborator, whom I keep locked in a back garret while I get all the praise and he but a share, which I cannot prevent him getting, of the pudding. I'm an excellent adviser, something like Moliere's servant. I pull back and I cut down and address the whole with the best words and sentences that I can find and make. I hold the pen, too, and I do the sitting at the table, which is about the worst of it, and when all is done, I make up the manuscript and pay for the registration, so that, on the whole, I have some claim to share, though not so largely as I do in the profits of our common enterprise. Well, that's... I might have read too much right there, but and there's more to this letter, really. It's talking about him and his dreams and his aspirations. And those of you who are writers out there, perhaps, I'm not sure if you do or not, but a lot of writers who are widely celebrated, or even mildly celebrated, suffer from an imposter syndrome. And, of course, he's talking about brownies. And, of course, he doesn't mean the chocolatey fudge little squares that we mix up with flour and egg and chocolate and whatever, and we make them chewy and crispy with a little, topping, right? No, nor are we talking about the junior Girl Scouts either, the brownies. Remember, they were the brownies. But he's talking about the fairies, or those little character. Hey, Amos, what's happening, bro? Okay, so you know what we're talking about, yeah? I can give but an instance or so of what part is done sleeping and what part awake, and leave the reader to share what laurels there are at his own nod between myself and collaborators. And to do this, I will first take a book that a number of persons have been polite enough to read. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. I had long been trying to write a story on the subject, to find a body, a vehicle, for that strong sense of man's double being which must at times come in upon and overwhelm the mind of every thinking creature. I had even written one, The Traveling Companion, which was returned by an editor on the plea that it was a work of genius and yet indecent, and which I burned the other day on the ground that it was not a work of genius, and that Jekyll had supplanted it. Then came one of those financial fluctuations to which, with an elegant modesty, I have hitherto referred to in the third person. For 2 days I went about racking my brains for a plot of any sort, and on the second night I dreamed the scene at the window, and a scene afterward split in two in which Hyde, pursued for some crime. Yeah, the brownies. Okay, so you guys know what brownies are. So for those of you, I think it appears, for those of you who have been following the series, I think it appears in week 2. There are 2 characters, Jekyll's friends. I think one is like Carew, and the other one is, I'm forgetting his name right now. But anyway, it's 2 of his old friends, and they're watching from the courtyard, and they can see up into the laboratory, because the ground level where they're at, in the courtyard, is a door in the ground level, and it leads right into a surgical theater. And above that is where he keeps all his chemicals and stuff. And so they're looking up at a window, and they see, I think they see Jekyll in the window. And then he's like, oh, blah, blah. And he comes back and he's like, ah, right? So he's all Hyde after that. So that's one of the scenes he dreamt. Yeah. And he wrote it in a flight of fancy in like 3 days. And his wife was very nicely keeping it up after him and editing the thing. And he says, and she says to him, I don't think you understand, Robert, that you're dealing with an allegory here. And he says, what? And he says, oh my God, it is. And so everything I've written so far is wrong. So he burns it, and she's shocked. And everyone, all the historians after that, are shocked. And he writes the whole thing again from start to finish in the next 3 days, and then they go over it in like 3 or 4 weeks. So I mean, it's basically like an 80 or 80 page deal. It's a thin little pamphlet, that was sold in the streets. You guys can go back. So I'm leaving these up for a while, so that you guys can. So other people, we're gonna try to see if we can get some new listeners. See what we're doing. But any case, so I'm going to continue this letter on dreams written by Robert Louis Stevenson in his own voice, and he's confessing that he's been plagued by some crazy dreams. And so I just described the scene in which he dreamt, that he had dreamt, the scene where 2 of Jekyll's friends witness him from the courtyard. It's a very cold and gray, bizarre crap. Not a very nice courtyard. It's just a crappy courtyard. And then they look up to the window, and they see the transformation in the window. And that was what he dreamt. I had even written one, The Traveling Companion, which was returned by an editor on the plea that it was a work of genius and yet indecent, which I burned the other day on the ground that it was not a work of genius, and that Jekyll had supplanted it. Then came one of those financial fluctuations to which, with an elegant modesty, I have hitherto referred in the third person. For 2 days I went about racking my brains for a plot of any sort, and on the second night I dreamed the scene at the window, and a scene afterwards split in two, in which Hyde, pursued for some crime, took the powder and underwent the change in the presence of his pursuers. All the rest was made awake and consciously, although I think I can trace in much of it the manner of my brownies. The meaning of the tale is therefore mine, and had long pre-existed in my garden of Adonis, and tried one body after another in vain. Indeed, I do most of the morality. Worse luck, and my brownies have not a rudiment of what we call a conscience. Mine, too, is the setting, mine, the characters. All that was given to me was the matter of 3 scenes, and the central idea of a voluntary change becoming involuntary. Will it be thought ungenerous, after I have been so liberally ladling out praise to my unseen collaborators, if I here toss them over, bound hand and foot, into the arena of the critics? For the business of the powders, which so many have censured, is, I am relieved to say, not mine at all, but the brownies. For the most part, it will be seen, my brownies are somewhat fantastic, like their stories, hot and hot, full of passion and the picturesque, alive with animating incident, and they have no prejudice against the supernatural. And that concludes our reading of Jekyll and Hyde, Strange Case of Jekyll and Hyde. That is it. I will bring Robert Louis Stevenson back soon with Mannheim. I have a plan. I have a master plan. I've been having a lot of fun reading, studying. I read through, well, I'll tell you, I think it's 10 or 15 stories that I did not even, I mean, they're in a special folder, like a maybe. Hey, Jay, thank you, bro. How many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 I kept. I mean, including a Dickens. I wanted a Dickens for Christmas. You know, what the Dickens, right? So Dickens is a euphemism for devil right now, right? What the devil? What the Dickens? Guy de Maupassant, 2 from Guy de Maupassant. Charlotte Riddell. I didn't go for these. We might hear them in a pinch if I need. But I wanted to tell you next week, October 17, Ambrose Bierce, you're going to love it. It's like 2 weird little tales, and they're like, that one's 8 pages. I mean, I don't know. If I don't have enough time, maybe I won't finish them. I don't know. This one's 5 pages. I can get through 13 pages. I've got that on the back burner, Mike. I love William Hope Hodgson. He is really great. And H. Rider Haggard, lots of fun. And for those people who don't know about these characters, who don't know about these writers, right away, I want you to check out the graphic novel League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. But what I've got for you is stuff that you might not know. And Haggard is coming up. Okay, we're going there. We're not going to not, we're going there, yeah? Hodgson, we're going there. But it's going to be in January, because I just got this whole thing settled. Let me tell you, Ambrose Bierce, you're going to want to hear from him. You're going to want to hear this one. 17, October 24, Fall of the House of Usher. You're going to want to hear this. 31. Guess what? I can't not. Do you know? You can almost guess what it's going to be. Famous cartoon, Halloween. Guess what? There's a bridge. There's a jack-o'-lantern. No? Sleepy Hollow, baby. Sleepy Hollow. It's gonna be cool. Halloween, Saturday, 31, full moon. Oh my God! Guess what? Did you know this all day long? Because I just well, I mean, I've known it all day long. I just didn't mention it now because I've been so distracted. But today's 10/10/2020. You get me? 10/10/2020. What's up with that? No wonder it's a weird day, man. I need a rest. I need to relaxate. I hope you guys are going to be comfy, cozy, and safe tonight. What's coming up? Markheim is coming up. That's Robert Louis Stevenson. Halloween is Ichabod Crane. I got Spring-Heeled Jack. How many of you know about Spring-Heeled Jack? We got Spring-Heeled Jack coming up. November 7th. We've got Holmes. Sherlock Holmes. Very, very cool. Oh, thank you, Susan. No, I enjoy having you here. It just makes it all... Oh, thank you, my dear. You're a sweetheart. Such a sweetheart. Thank you so much, Susan. What else we have coming up? Oh, so after November 7, which is Sherlock Holmes, you're going to love all these stories. They're going to be really fun. They're going to be really, really fun. Just, I don't know, man. Have you ever knitted before? Take up knitting or crochet, you know, and like crochet and like listen to this stuff because it's really fun. And yes, Haggard will be coming up. Who wrote The African Millionaire? I've been thinking about African Millionaire, but I decided kind of not to go for The African Millionaire because number one, I don't like that he's South African. Number two, I don't like that he's a millionaire because I know how he got to be a millionaire. But it is interesting. At the end of every case, he resolves it with a telephone call. And to us, it doesn't make much of a difference. You call somebody on the telephone, that's no big deal. But back in his day, it was like high technology, right? So, what do we got here? Really? Oh, dude. Just a minute. Let me finish this message. Did I set this? Is this thing set for? It might not be set for. I'm gonna set this for public. I might have accidentally not set it for public. I'm so sorry. So I wanted to tell you November 7 we've got, and then November 7 we're gonna watch. It's like watching a movie, man. It's so cool. These were brilliantly spun tales. So we're gonna have the Fall of the House of Usher, Poe. It's gonna be great. Descent into Madness. We're gonna have Ichabod Crane coming up. We're gonna have what was that? That cool one? We're gonna have Spring-Heeled Jack coming up. We're going to have, and then we're gonna have some Holmes, and then we're going to have special mystery. It's gonna be question mark, but I'll like put a spaceship on it so you guys know it's not spooky anymore. It's actually brilliant and philosophical and kind of sad. And why did I write it like that? Because sometimes with these novels where we fall in love with a character and feel sad about them, their philosophy means more to the heart. I mean, this is what affected me when I was younger, and maybe, I don't know, maybe it's going to be pointed toward young adults. I've been thinking about young adult novels. I'm not sure how it's going to pan out. I think it's an adult novel. I think it's on the measure of J.M. Coetzee, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, Foe, and also Subterraneans, Kerouac, and also Illusions by Richard Bach. If you know those, this is one of those, but it's set on a moon in Autonoe. What's Autonoe? You're going to know exactly what Autonoe is in a few weeks. So just hang with us. You're going to have a great time. And then in January, okay, wait a minute. Then I've got a great Christmas ghost story for you. Outer Space, Moroccans in Space is going to last through Thanksgiving. And then we'll end up having a Christmas ghost. And then in January we're starting Frankenstein. And then we're off into the new year with COVID, right? President bullcrap. H. Rider Haggard, yes. And Hodgson. H. Rider Haggard wrote just like Crazy Cool Adventures. And what's his head? Hodgson wrote brilliant haunted sea tales. So, like, there's one that I love that I tried to find months ago, but couldn't get it. I mean, I couldn't find a good copy. The deal is I need to find the full text on the internet and then turn it into into a file, and then I read it off my computer. But that's going to be it's these sailors, and they happened. So they're actually turn of the century style, but they happen to have been written in teens and 20s. So he's a little bit late, basically, for the crucial era that I do like to concentrate on. But Hodgson wrote haunted sea tales, and there's this one where this group of sailors finds a what's it called? A ship that has every surface has been replaced with a fungus, a phosphorescent fungus. And I want to read that one for you because it's kind of creepy, but it's interesting. It's cool, you know. It glows on the sea at night, so it's remarkable for these sailors to come upon a ship that glows. It looks like everything is intact and that it's just glowing, but it's actually covered with mycelium. House on the Borderlands. Dude, so many things are better than HPL. I mean, but we're just, you know, you go to HPL for a particular, thank you, Mike, for saying that. But people go to HPL for his words, for it's the language. They don't go to him. I mean, certain ones might go to him for racism. But people go to Lovecraft for his words, and for the rats in the walls. You have to just like. It's interesting writing as writing goes. You know, it's we're just looking at this as a writer, not as a xenophobic bastard, hate-filled bastard. Poor guy. I mean, he was afraid of his own big toe. That's what I always say about that guy. He was wonderful in his own stupid idiocy. We're way past that. We're way past that. Just check out Lovecraft Country if you've got the Time and the HBO. And they've turned Lovecraft on his head, so it's cool. It's cool. So there's plenty of good stuff out there. We've got a great number of weeks coming up with exciting tales. And of course, if COVID is miraculously called off, I don't need to do this anymore. We're going to go out. I'll see you out there. We're going to have a drink together, and we will just celebrate in person. There are a few things that might call me away from this series. I am not sure yet. Nothing is now in action. But for the time being, we're here. And we're buckled into our chairs. And we're going to just continue forth. Sally forth. Sigo escuchándote. ¿Cómo? Gracias por tu historia. Okay. Gracias a tu, Rosana, mi querida. Y otra vez quiero hablar contigo muy luego. Okay? So very soon. And to all, thank you so much for being here. It's actually super late now. Oh my God. This is like the longest one I've ever done, and I thought it was going to be the shortest one. Thank you for your patience. I've been dealing with a lot. It's very emotional. If you have time, please write to me. I'd love to hear from you. Okay? You know who I am. And you know how to get a hold of me, and I'd love to hear from you if you have the time. So thank you so much. And I'll see you next week, whatever that week brings. And I'm a little afraid of this week. I'm a little scared. But we will sally forth. Okay? Thank you. Good night.